So it's my pleasure to introduce the next team presenting now. That's led by Selena Bartlett, and she'll be joined by Stephanie Tobin to present. No? Okay, so we'll be just Selena presenting social media use and anxiety, generative AI for cross-cultural anxiety detection and support. Over to you, Selena. Thank you.
Thank you, MEXA, and welcome for bringing us here. It's been an absolutely incredible opportunity. So my name is Professor Selena Bartlett, and I'm a neuroscientist, and I'm joined here by Dr. Stephanie Tobin, who's a social psychologist, and Professor Liam Neeson from UCL. We're representing our whole team. And recently I was the scientific advisor for the social media legislation that's about to be enacted in Australia. So it gives me just a wonderful opportunity to know that we can try and understand how to use the latest capability in AI to try and bring care and ethical support to this particular area. We're interested in understanding the intersection between social media use and anxiety. You can learn more about our project at this QR code, which is our website that we created, and we have our poster here. At the website, we put together a very short little video to explain the whole overview of our project, and you're very welcome to go and look at that. So we've named it SAGE-DM to represent social media anxiety guidance ethics using data-driven mechanisms. We actually want to use generative AI to detect actually social media anxiety-related behavioural patterns, and to really develop adaptive detection tools and data sets and support across cultures and contexts. So we know the scale of the problem. We know 1 in 25 people have an anxiety disorder that goes untreated, but we now have 5.6 billion social media accounts, of which there is 3 hours daily use. This project was born because a psychiatrist came and a couple of years ago now and said we need some kind of tool that assesses social media use indices, because we're seeing stuff in the patients and clients that we have no way of assessing its contribution and no way of having a tool to discuss this. And this is where the project was originally seeded. We know that screens are designed to capture our attention. They're really good at it, and they're now capturing 9-month-old babies' attention, and you can see that. So they're really, really good at doing this. Also, neuroscience, just like AI and all this beautiful data, has also updated its knowledge banks really significantly through brain imaging technology. So that's also transformative for mental health. We all have a brain, and brain health and fitness is vital. So we can now ask questions about for example, one study just showed what's the difference between a personalised short-form video versus a general short-form video on the brain networks and connections. And this paper showed that personalised short-form video content activates the reward parts of the brain more effectively than just general short-form video. Hence doom scrolling, hence why it keeps us there and attracted. So what we're interested in doing is understanding this type of social media use and its contribution to anxiety. We're not saying that it's a causal link. We're not interested in chicken and egg questions. We're interested in understanding the feedback loops that are taking place and trying to disrupt them. And SAGE-DM aims to do this and prevent it, and also to reduce anxiety risk from this. We're not here to say social media is good or bad. We're not here for any of that. We're trying to allow agency in the hands of your phone, not monitoring. So if I was to challenge you right now to what's your screen time, if you were to go to your phone, this is mine on Sunday before I was doing all these presentations and all these deadlines that we've been all operating to. And this brings us to the challenge, right? We have very really small amounts of data. It's relying on self-report. And it's very generalized, even though there are many other places that have all the data to understand exactly the use. We have a lot of cultural bias. Most of the evidence and information is coming from Western users. We have very unclear mechanisms between anxiety and social media, or social media use leading to to anxiety, for example. And we also have currently very few safe AI tools for helping people in real time. So during the early phases of the accelerator, we were able to do 2 scoping reviews to understand and develop a conceptual mechanistic model linking social media use to anxiety risk, anxiety risk. We're not here to predict anxiety. We're not here to diagnose anxiety. We're here to understand the delta change in anxiety risk from social media use. To summarise, it's at our poster, the kind of literature reviews we conducted, but just to summarise, there are 5 main pathways that mutually reinforce each other, and the one that's the most well studied is social evaluation threat, and that's the one that we would think about where we'd be able to do a core intervention. So how do we go about interrupting this dynamic loop that exists between social media use and anxiety? And we're very lucky because the technology's really advanced, and we wouldn't have been able to do this even a number of years ago. And so with this screenome technology, where you can take 5-second screenshots and then analyze what the content is, the patterns of use, and actually create a screenome, much like a genome, for each participant, to kind of get to this more personalized level. And that's really the only way forward. You can't just deliver generic content. And this technology is called Screen Live Capture. And this was developed by one of our team members, Dr. Andrew Yee, and also Daniel Muse at Stanford. He has his own particular form of Screen Live Capture. So what is a screenome? So during the accelerator, this is like a typical screenome. It looks a little bit like a genome, which is why I loved it so much. And you can see here 8 different participants, and you're looking at 16 different types of media use, and it's all color-coded. And I think the thing that sticks out straight away is how personalised our use is. And that's why if we want to be effective in understanding this, we have to get to a personalised use case. So this has already been published by Dr. Yee, and it's also human ethics approved. So with this really rich data set, we could ask the question, can we use generative AI and AI to actually go more deeply into the social media aspects of all the data that's already collected, so that we can actually use these tools on device to do just-in-time interventions and predictions? And that's the core mechanism we're thinking about first. For example, social evaluation threat is something like when you fear being judged, like I am right now. Thank you. It spikes your anxiety, and this social evaluation threat, as experts here would know, activates several pathways. 3 of those pathways are 1, your stress response, 2, attention bias towards negative cues, and 3, rumination. And that's exactly what's happening on social media, isn't it? When you think of passive scrolling, checking and comparisons, that's always happening. And so what we'd like to think about is, can we understand the behavioural fingerprint using the screenome data to actually look at that and make a prediction so that we can actually deliver an understanding through pilot studies using EMAs to actually detect delta changes in anxiety over time? And then can we, with this understanding, can we deliver a kind of small intervention on device to disrupt this feedback and dynamic loop that's taking place? We kind of want to move from comparison to connection, because not all social media is bad. It actually helps people connect as well. It's a global project. We're in 5 countries, and this has been an incredible experience for all of us, working weekly together, combining our distinct expertise in a way that I've never experienced in my life as a scientist, writing grants for the NIH and NHMRC in Australia. It's been a real game changer for us, and we've learnt so much. The lived experience part of this has really changed my mind as a scientist, and I feel very humbled and embarrassed that I should have been doing this a long time ago. And we learnt so much already, and this has been led by Professor Sharon Lawn, who's an expert in lived experience and the CEO of Lived Experience Australia, who has global connections, and she already conducted a number of co-design panels. And because of the learnings and the workshops that we attended through MEXA, it really changed how we started framing our whole thought process around our proposal. And this led to me being kind of horrified that I hadn't done this before. And one of the quotes that really stuck out from these panels, like, if people are not in the room and risk has been spoken about them, that's not collaboration. But when the person is in the room with equal power, that's ethical. And I just keep learning all the time, and even learning about the surveys that we're giving people with lived experience and how they feel about that, and then what they do as a consequence because they don't feel like we understand. So that has now been embedded in our project in a side-by-side manner. I want to finish by saying I think the critical part in this project is humans don't understand exponential, and what we can deliver today in November is something I couldn't have delivered in November last year or even May when we made the original submission. I can't believe how fast it's changing. And this is just one little Bloomberg News looking at how we might be thinking that it's so expensive to do this. But now that they're chopping up AI tasks using agentic processes, this is getting cheaper and faster at speeds that we can't even imagine. And I'm sure DeepMind understand this as they solve protein folding recently. And I think about that a lot as a scientist and think that we don't even know what we don't know about what we can deliver in this space. And when we talk about ground truth in mental health, I want to finish by saying perhaps this is the protein unfolding moment for mental health. Doesn't it need it? So I want to introduce you to my team. I'm very proud to represent them. It's been an incredible experience, and we have experts from all over the world bringing their beautiful expertise. So many hours. I'm just being gobsmacked, and I'm just so grateful to what they've contributed. I want to thank MEXA and Welcome for making this possible. I've never written a grant like this in this way ever before, and it's really changed how we can think about what we can deliver, and I think we should bring this forward to all grant proposal writing in the future. So thank you for listening.
Cool, thank you. Amazing presentation and just amazing project, I think. I think parents globally are sort of struggling with this. Myself, I'm a parent, 15-year-old son, and it's a real big challenge, and I don't think anyone has the answers, so awesome that you guys are working on this. 5.5 hours was, I checked my time, and so that was screen time personally. But my question is, like you mentioned the intervention, and we know that teenagers are very creative around getting around these. In New Zealand, we tried to ban social media and phones in all schools, and it has not worked. Where are you guys at in terms of what that intervention looks like, or have you got any thoughts around what that might be? So, for example, if you detect that someone is sort of getting into a high-risk zone, what does that sort of intervention look like? Is it locally on the phone? Is it, any sort of thoughts there?
So that is going to be really, really important consideration. The biggest part for the beginning of this project is really about understanding what is the factors in the social media part that's actually changing the delta, right? So we understand that with the new papers that have just been published in the last 3 years, because social media only started in 2010. So people were saying that it's very uncertain about this contribution, but the papers are now starting to come out. Remember, it takes 10 years. So in terms of the intervention, that's about phase 3 of our study, because we actually have to get the data sets. So we don't even have that yet to understand what is and that's the beauty of AI and the capability that we now have, is that we can get a deep, personalised understanding, and that's what I love about screenomes. So it's data-driven, it's not self-report, because I can't even tell you what I saw on my last feed on social media, for example. So that's why we need to do this part first, and this part is critical before we even jump to that. And that was really helpful, because at the workshop on pilot data, forget his name, Stephen from UC Irvine, said, I don't want you to tell me you're going to deliver me an intervention that's going to solve anxiety. I want to see the step change and the hypothesis testing of how you're going to get there. So we're going to be structuring our proposal in exactly that way, in a very scientific, hypothesis-driven way. And I forgot to say that SAGE-DM sets the framework for our whole proposal. It sets the aims and the deliverables in that order. And so I can't answer you that question exactly, but we have clinical experts on our team. And Kieran from UCL, who's joining our team, is an expert in JIT-AI. And so I just want to say to you that from a person that's heavily involved in the social media legislation and understanding what's happening to children right now, it's critical we understand what's taking a 7-year-old into an eating disorder clinic, for example. That's what the psychiatrists and psychologists are asking us. And so we're going to be very specific, and when we get to that phase, we have to narrow our model right down to, say, eating disorders, for example, which is where the project originally started from. But we're not there yet.
Thanks for sharing your work. I was curious about thoughts about applying this to AI chatbots, which are, very in the news. I know social media
Yes.
can mean a lot of different things, and
I think they're similar.
okay.
Yeah.
Just one related question to that. Because a lot of young people use these tools because of privacy and its non-judgmental nature, I guess kind of similar to the last question. It'll be interesting to see what their thoughts are on something monitoring their use or surveilling their use.
Oh, of course, yeah. So this particular work was done in Singapore. So it was people age 18 to 30, and that's written in the paper how they felt about that, because surveillance is something that no one wants. But they're consenting into a study, and it involves a lot of lived experience advisory work around this. And we won't be focusing on young people in the first iteration. It's going to be 18 plus. And why we're doing that is because of we're going to be doing it. So if to get ethics approval in this space has turned out to be incredibly more difficult than I expected, because ethics committees, and we talked about this in one of the workshops, have become gun shy about AI. And so once upon a time, something that was like exempt is now low risk, and something that was low risk is now medium risk, and it's moved up the scale because the people reviewing the applications don't have AI savvy. Not all of them, but some of them. So this is something that we've been navigating really quickly through the accelerator phase to try and get a lived experience advisory panel ethics through so we could publish our manuscript, for example. So that's why we have to focus 18 plus first, but then we can, once we've shown feasibility, then we can move to younger age groups, obviously, but it's something that's really important that we have to take into account. But remember that partly it's all about data security, and I didn't get to mention the ATD technology that has come out of the university that I'm part of, and Dr. Laith Azawadi has joined our team. So that's called AI to data learning, so that we can actually share weights and not share there's no centralization of any of this data across the countries. It'll be all on local servers and encrypted and redacted immediately on a very localized server. And then we'll be doing AI to D training on those localized models and sharing those weights basically to inform each other cross-country as well. Not necessarily all doing the same type of AI training as well. So it's a really exciting project too, I think, in that way.
Last question. A great focus area, kind of really interesting use case, and I like the screenome approach as well. I'm curious, I would imagine that not everyone would feel comfortable with the screenome, and I'm curious what kind of insights you have about the kind of survivorship bias you're going to get from people that do consent to this. Like, do you have any sense of, obviously that doesn't obscure or kind of move away from this being valuable work. I'm curious what kind of skewness you're expecting in your sample.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't answer that right now. We have to do the studies to find that out. So we're relying on an available human ethics approved study already, and we tried to start doing this in the early parts of the accelerator so that we could answer some of that question, but the human ethics committees they wouldn't even let us as researchers start that because of the third-party legal ramifications. I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but we're going to spend money getting ethics approval, but the companies can sue us in their legal agreements. So we have to be incredibly careful about what we're doing, which is fantastic, to be honest, that we have to take that extra layer of safety and security for the people that we're looking after. But that's something that has extended our inability to address that question straight away.
So next up, we'll have David Glowacki presenting the development and testing of an intelligent social facilitator for group-based treatment of social anxiety. Over to you, David.
And then if I need to move the mouse to start the video.
No, but it will work.
It starts,
Yeah.
right? Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, hello. My name's David Glowacki. I run a laboratory in Galicia, in the north of Spain, Santiago de Compostela, called the Intangible Realities Laboratory, IRL. And we work on all sorts of immersive technology for facilitating human-to-human connection, amongst other things. I'm presenting on behalf of my collaborator, Joseph Hardy, who couldn't be here because he has had a rather serious health issue that's arisen recently. And my colleague, Greg Roufa, is here with me, also working on this project. So if you see him around, you'll know what project we're involved in. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposal that we're thinking about. So I'll start by giving a little bit of a background of what we're focusing on. We're focusing on social anxiety disorder, which I don't have to say very much about because we've had a number of prior presentations talk about social anxiety disorder, but effectively it's a persistent fear of social performance situations, like this one, for example, in which the person is exposed to unfamiliar people or to possible scrutiny by others. This is from the DSM, right? The individual fears he or she will act in a way or show anxiety symptoms that will be embarrassing or humiliating. It's quite pervasive, at least in the US, according to the National Institute of Health, which I think still exists this week. 12.1% of US adults will experience social anxiety disorder at some point in their lives. So it's a big problem, and there's not scalable solutions. And so I won't go through this in too much detail, but social exposure therapy, social skills training, cognitive behavioral therapy with meditation are some strategies that have been investigated for social anxiety disorder. Group therapy is also empirically validated for social anxiety with significant effects, but the access is constrained by the availability of facilitators and also geographic barriers and a high cost. And so, what we're looking at is a group therapy-based solution using virtual reality for this particular diagnosis. But before I sort of dive into what we're going to do in the project, I just want to take a step back and just, I think everyone in this room seems pretty aware of this, but I mean, I don't know if you, like me, are just completely bored and have your mind numb by the amount of AI hype at this stage. One of my friends who's a professor at Stanford, he just shorted NVIDIA, actually. So that's like an interesting take. So do AI chatbots offer a solution? Well, maybe, but there's a lot of perils. And so some of you might have seen this recent paper from researchers at Stanford, which was looking at whether LLMs should be substitutes for therapists. And what they effectively found was that LLMs often express stigma toward those with mental health conditions, and they respond inappropriately to certain common conditions in naturalistic therapy settings. And this is in large part a result of their sycophancy, right? So they're trained for maximum engagement through reinforcement learning. And humans, when they do reinforcement learning, they like things to tell them how great they are, right? So the conclusion of this paper, which I'd recommend everybody have a look at, just published very recently, June 2025, is that chatbots will not replace a human, should not at this point replace the sort of human therapeutic alliance. And so there's a whole bunch of recent high-profile examples that kind of highlight the perils of relying on LLMs for this kind of thing. This is a fantastic article about the dynamics of how chatbots go into a sycophantic delusional spiral. Recent New York Times article. This is a very sad story about a boy who is kind of looking for, solace in a chatbot and where it got him. And it's another New York Times article. Some of you have probably seen these articles, but I put these up here not to overemphasize the point, but just that these things don't necessarily work out of the box in the way that's being sold to us by the tech industry. And so we have to be careful. And so what we're looking at doing in this proposal is using a new VR paradigm that we've developed in my lab over the last several years and in collaboration with a company called Enuma, where what we're doing is we actually run virtual reality, but it's very different than normal virtual reality. And there's a few things that distinguish it significantly. First of all, it's groups of people. So they're the therapist that runs a group of people. And so people can log in from anywhere around the world and be involved in this environment. The second thing is that you don't see yourself as a person, you see bodies as dissolved into light. And so this has a really amazing unexpected consequence that we've discovered in a variety of publications, where you relax the sort of anxiety that comes from typical social scenarios where we're involved in judgment and sort of the interpersonal sort of cues that we get all the time. So I have a very quick video I'll just show you here. It gives a sense of what this looks like. So this is one person, she's in her room. So here I'm changing my reality dial, so slowly I fade out the environment, you see her dissolve into light, and then other beings will appear around her, right? And so the whole time in this experience, these people are distributed anywhere around the world. This all harnesses the power of real-time cloud computing, and people can join into this environment and participate in these therapeutically guided group sessions that can be applied to a whole variety of contexts. And there's an extremely strong sense of presence and embodiment. And it's really hard for me to explain to you what this is like. You kind of have to do it. This video is the best that I can do in this presentation form. But if you're interested, by all means, speak to myself or Greg, and we'll talk to you about how this happens. So now we've had a number of research studies recently where we've shown unexpectedly the results that we get. This was a paper that went viral a couple years ago where we actually showed that these group pneumodelic VR experiences can produce ego attenuation and connectedness that's comparable to psychedelics, because they produce enhanced feelings of connectedness. They reduce the sort of sense of ego attachment, and they reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. So we have a number of studies we're doing right now at my lab in Spain. We're actually using this in the context of helping cancer patients who are dealing with end-of-life anxiety. We've just started those trials at the hospital in Santiago de Compostela. The results are incredible. These are people that have anywhere from stage 2 to stage 4 cancer diagnoses, and it's helping them. And we tried this because we knew psychedelics were used in the context of helping people with end-of-life anxiety. So we thought, well, if we have VR that's like psychedelics, kind of, it's not exactly like psychedelics, first and foremost because it's legal, but maybe it will help people in other contexts. So our idea here is really to extend this treatment protocol to people that have social anxiety. And the paradigm that we're going at for here is, I'm calling this AI in the loop. And so it's really, we've heard people talk about human in the loop, and it's so funny to me, like everybody's so ready to enslave themselves to these AI chatbots. But how about if the AI is our servant? So we put the AI in the loop. So we preserve the human therapist, right? And the AI helps us make better decisions. And this is really important in this environment, because when you have a facilitator that's guiding a group of people in this environment, one of the things that's powerful about this environment is the fact that everybody's dissolved into light. But in a therapeutic alliance, that makes it a little bit more complicated, because now I don't get all the interpersonal signs that I normally get in a typical therapeutic relationship. So the idea is to use AI to do real-time tracking of semantic analysis and sentiment analysis based on what people say. Everyone can talk to each other in the environment. And also to then have some biofeedback signals, namely heart rate and heart rate variability, that can help whoever's guiding the session to have more input data so they can make more informed decisions in real time while they're running groups of therapeutic sessions for people that are distributed across the world. And so now you have a way to do this which is scalable and which can help more people that have this disorder. So very briefly, I just want to emphasize, AI in the loop, the new paradigm in AI, okay? But I think we're moving in a situation, there's kind of, you can imagine a continuum of human only, AI only, and here what we're looking is AI, but crucially AI being a smaller box than the human. And so maybe if you all want to start talking about AI in the loop moving forward, that could be a good way to guarantee that we don't completely displace the value of human therapists. And so, I'm finishing up here, I got the 1 minute notice. The innovations of this project are really learning from expert facilitators. So we have a number of facilitators that are professionals in this environment who are delivered thousands of these sessions over the last several years. So if we can train the AIs to learn what the human facilitator is doing, and then we also have signals that come from people via biofeedback, then the AI can actually be offering the facilitator things to consider as they move forward through the session to help people gain maximum therapeutic benefit. And so this shows one of our prototype that we have actually working. This is part of what we've done on the accelerators. We've actually created an interface where the polar heart band, which measures heart rate and heart rate variability, Bluetooth connects to the headset so we can get these real-time data feeds. And we also built a technological infrastructure that allows the therapeutic facilitator in real time to receive data about sentiment and affect analysis real time using this interface that appears in the VR environment. And so, yeah, this is the team. Fantastic group of people. The lived experience panel has been convened a number of times, and so a lot of the iterative design has been in collaboration with them. And as the previous talk highlighted, that's been invaluable to date. So happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much. Super interesting work. This is Abdallah from CWI in Amsterdam. So I have a question. Like, I love the idea of being able to get real-time biofeedback for a facilitator, but that's distracting. How do you get people's attention to focus on the bio data? And at the same time, be able to tailor the intervention? Because if someone is there with you and they're able to see that you're now distracted to try to read what's happening, this might influence the whole session. But maybe you've done pilot tests, and I'm curious.
Yeah, so maybe I think maybe you're not understanding exactly how this works. So right now, when there's a facilitator in a session with, say, 6 people, 2 people in the US, 1 person in Germany, 2 people in the UK, and 1 person in Portugal, which is pretty typical for our sessions. The facilitator is talking to all the people in there, and other people can speak to one another also. The facilitator at the moment is having to do all their guessing about how to interact with people based on what people say and what's the affect baked in their voice, because that's the only channel of input that they have. And so what the facilitator is doing right now is in real time, they're using an in-world VR interface to make on-the-fly decisions about how to modify the experience to best suit the therapeutic needs of the group. So the idea here is just to add a suite of tools to help the facilitator make those decisions so they can focus on holding space instead of all the button pressing and things that they're normally doing to optimize the experience. And so the idea here is that will help us get a larger cohort of facilitators, because what you find is that people are good at holding space, aren't good at doing all the technical stuff. And so the idea here is let's get the AIs to help us do a lot of the technical stuff to then allow the facilitators to really excel at what they excel at, which is facilitating human-to-human connection.
Gotcha, this makes sense.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's sort of next generation, but it seems like it could present a lot of safety issues in 2 respects. One is the AI could go rogue, right, and do all sorts of, it could start hallucinating, right? So it may need its own therapist, or the therapist could go rogue, right? So what sort of safety are you thinking about here, both in terms of protecting the AI from going rogue, or from the therapist or therapists from doing things that might be harmful?
Yeah, so let me say the idea of the AI in the loop paradigm is that the human is the ultimate decision maker. So I think we know hallucination is a problem. And my background is actually, my PhD is in computational molecular physics, and I do a lot of work in developing machine learning models. And I don't actually think it's ever going to be possible to have an AI not hallucinate. So the idea here is that as long as the AI is in the loop and the human is the decision maker, we minimize cases where the AI goes and does something totally crazy, right? Which is going to happen. Now, if the therapist goes rogue, well, I think that's a much more general question that we should talk about at the poster session, right, that I'm not prepared to talk about here. Okay.
Hello? Now it works, okay. Hi, I'm Chris from Osnabrück University. Thank you for the talk. I've got one question with regards to the translation for the social anxiety. Do you have any preliminary results as to how this helps people to navigate with their anxiety in a real world?
Yeah, so what we do have at the moment is we have 4 studies that have been published that show reductions in symptoms for other classes of anxiety that overlap with some of social anxiety. So that's exactly what we're looking to do in this project, is to carry out the studies looking at mapping. So we have good reason to believe that because it helps with indicators in other classes of anxiety, it should work for social anxiety based on a bunch of thematic analysis that we've done to date. The studies that we've done so far as part of the accelerator are with our lived experience panel. So these are highly focused sessions with people that have lived experience of social anxiety and doing in-depth studies with them and evaluating that. But this is exactly why we're looking to hopefully have the Wellcome Trust support us in doing this, so that we can carry this forward based on what I think is a reasonable hypothesis at the moment into social anxiety from other classes of anxiety.
Thank you for the presentation. I just had a question. What do you have plans for scalability? Because as you mentioned, the facilitators are key in this, and will always remain as the primary, as a facilitator. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of people suffering from anxiety. So what are the plans for scaling this to that many people?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's a few different ways I could answer that question. The first is that if you look at 99% of VR is for one person. So the fact that we're doing groups of 6 to 12 already means we're scaling like 10 times more than that, okay? So we're scaling at that level, so that's good. So I think your question is really about, well, what about scaling beyond that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I can tell you that at the moment the people that are really adept at holding these sessions, the therapists that we're working with right now, are people that have very high technical skills and extremely good social skills to be able to hold space for a group. And the overlap of people that have that combination of skills is very small. So if we introduce this AI in the loop, intelligent social facilitator paradigm, we will increase the number of therapists that we can access, because now we can get access to people that are good at holding space and they don't have to do all the technical stuff any longer. So that will help the scaling. Beyond that, so as somebody that's lectured a lot at universities around the world, what you notice is that the quality of care instruction you receive is always inversely proportional to the size of the class, right? So if it's a small group of 10 people, it's a really great learning experience. And if it's like 400 people, it's not so good. And so I think there's like a fundamental law of scaling that we all have to reckon with that kind of flies in the face of the standard Silicon Valley accelerationist discourse, which is that you can always scale quality at the same quantity and you never lose anything. Like, that's simply not true. And so I think I'd want to reframe that question and say, well, what is the optimal way of preserving what is beneficial and therapeutic for people in a way that doesn't diminish the quality of it? And I think for that, I think that's still an open question of exactly what that is. But I'm definitely not going to sit here and tell you that every single person in the world that has social anxiety is going to experience this. I don't know if that's viable, but I think it could help a lot of people that are within that population.
Next up, we'll have a lot of extra slides. Next up, it's my pleasure to invite Tanzeem Choudhury to present towards collaborative and personalized mental health, integrating GenAI with passive sensing. Over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Tanzeem Choudhury, and it's a pleasure to tell you a little bit more about the project that we're working on around combining generative AI-based chatbot with passive sensing. And our focus is actually to improve treatment-seeking behavior, particularly in men, and deliver evidence-based support. And the reason why we are focusing on that is often men don't seek help for their mental health, and often don't seek out psychotherapy and mental health professionals. and there is also a higher likelihood of death by suicide. And in mental health crises, often men seek out if they go to primary care, their general practitioners, primary care practitioners, or some community support. So I think there is an opportunity of understanding the mental health state and also providing support where someone is not seeking out mental health help and often are more resistant. What's our underlying kind of hypothesis is that for mental health and in addition, other than just overall, men and everyone included, often seek primary care is their first entry point to seeking care, and their primary care doctors are often not the most equipped to deliver the best mental health treatment. So often integrated behavioral health care has been shown to be really effective in scaling mental health care and empowering primary care physicians to deliver more evidence-based care and access to mental health professional and psychiatrists to provide the expertise and support that's needed. But often this integrated behavioral care model has been harder to scale and it's been costly, and particularly there is a huge difference between integrated behavioral care within an urban and rural setting. So our goal, fundamentally what we would like to do is use AI and the context of the user from sensors to better be able to support these kinds of model that can scale into different contexts. So in this care, like this is a traditional model where the primary care provider is providing the main source kind of contact point for treatment, and there is a behavioral clinician that is supporting primary care, and there's a psychiatric consultant that's also helping with medication and med management. There, we want to see how AI tools can actually be a part of the care team in ways of supporting both the primary care and in some cases augment or support, take the role of the behavioral healthcare provider, particularly in low acuity setting, and then reaching out to expertise when you have more serious or acute conditions. I want to so our team is a mixture of computer scientists and clinical psychologists, as well as lived experience individual that combine the sensing, AI, mental health kind of therapeutic agents, as well as including also experts in suicide prevention and digital mental health, and also lived experience expert who has a lot of expertise in male mental health and also across different communities, including indigenous communities and communities all across United States. So this is originally focused in the United States, with hopefully something we want to be able to look at and have lived experience in our board members from outside of the US to look at kind of translational opportunities. But right now the focus is within the US. I want to start with some background of how we got here and what are our building blocks that we're going to build upon. So my group and there are pretty much a lot of the other folks in the group has done a lot of work in how we can incorporate passive sensing data into understanding mental health kind of trajectory of patients with different kind of mental health challenges. So just by kind of both smartphone and also wearable data, by looking at how we can extract data from their location, their phone usage, combination, even how they are charging their phone, their location, accelerometer, and we can get to things around how much time are they spending at home, where are the places they visit, is their radius of mobility shrinking or growing, are they not leaving their home. Accelerometer, we all know about step counts, but we can also look at psychomotor changes in terms of whether someone's walking slower or faster. With combination of kind of how they use their phone as well as kind of overall phone use. Not only can we get to individual sleep, but sleep interruptions as well as by looking at their circadian rhythm. So is someone kind of routines and behavior aligned with this circadian rhythm or very misaligned. And they're rare, particularly in certain mental health conditions, the misalignment of circadian rhythm is also predictive. So we have shown that these types of information can be used to track changes in mental health. If we look at across different dimensions and look at the variability from kind of the routines, in variability in routines and anomalous behaviors, that's we've also shown that can be predictive of relapse and kind of significant kind of shift in mental health states. So by significant shift, we can think like if you look at depression and PHQ-9, is there a category shift in their mental health changes? And we have used that also to provide kind of information to clinicians to when might be a moment to reach out to the patient because we are seeing significant changes. Also, our co-applicant, Nick Jacobson at Dartmouth, has built a mental health kind of psychotherapy chatbot called Therabot. This is the only right now clinically validated therapeutic chatbot that's built out of Dartmouth in terms of that they've developed it using 6 years of kind of clinician generated and tested data. So there is, they did a lot of early work in actually using internet data sources and saw that the kind of therapeutic kind of responses weren't quite appropriate, but then they curated a lot of testing and through about 100 clinical kind of staff and I think about 100,000 hours of data overall to generate a really evidence-based approach to delivering therapy, and that's been tested and showed against waitlist control to be effective. So our goal, and then we have our lived experience, both in activists and leaders who are connecting us to different communities so that we have diversity. So our work is actually kind of bring these two pieces together to show that although chatbots can provide evidence-based therapeutic intervention, but a lot of these interventions are effective based on their state and their, so understanding the context is very important. And it's also very important in terms of thinking about risk behavior. So if someone is expressing certain language and also we know they haven't left their home for a week, you know that they might be at a higher risk than if they're going about their daily lives. So we are trying to combine this information both to provide what type of intervention to give and also understanding kind of risk models. So we want to kind of integrate GenAI in through participatory design to how we can best support men's mental health, but also to provide a tool for clinicians to interfaces so that they can take action and provide information for doing measurement-based care and overall understand how it could be used to generate kind of safe and ethical framework to support kind of AI-based therapeutic intervention in depression. So in terms of kind of where we are. I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to kind of go through. We are in the actually conducting interviews with individuals with lived experience to understand how they see it supporting their mental health, whether they feel comfortable giving access to their sensor data and giving that information to also their primary care providers. And we see a lot of this information being specialized across different AI agents. One is understanding what kind of behavioral intervention strategies to be used based on the measurement that we get, looking at how we can support measurement-based care. And finally, we have some safety agents that will flag based on the context in terms of whether someone should reach out in terms of their clinical care. So with that, our goal is that there is right now a barrier between how AI tools are used and clinical support, and to eliminate that and have a more closed loop connection between clinical care and AI and sensing data. Thank you.
Considering that the group of men in the United States is very large, have you and your team considered how you would prospectively optimize your AI solution to consider various demographics or even cultural nuances that may support or prohibit men being accepting of your technology, or also some of the cultural nuances which are associated with, for example, patterns of behavior from passive sensors?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So one of the things we want to start with is groups that are more less likely to seek care. So we are kind of looking at, that's why we're focusing on indigenous communities as well as people of color who often don't. There is more stigma associated with it. And then kind of a general representative pool of kind of men. Our goal is to look at how much are there similarities that we can learn from and what are the differences. But I do think that we would have to kind of adapt to the cultural nuances, and one of the things we'll be looking at is how we can fine-tune these type of models, and what information do we have to provide, and how much information do we have to provide to make it a more culturally sensitive. Because I think that's a big issue, that if it requires a huge amount of time and effort to do it in each cases, it's less scalable. But if we can have a general baseline foundational kind of framework, which we can fine tune with some information from that community, that would be more scalable. Excellent question.
It's really cool to see the chatbot and passive sensitive branches come together. My question is also around working with men. Specifically, as I understand, it seems clinician-facing, but I know with many men, traditional kind of talk therapy approaches may not be as well received. Yeah. So are they gonna be receiving like these passive sensing feedback, or is that something that's still under exploration?
Yeah, so there is two interfaces. One is for clinician and one is for the individuals, and the goal is that it's not going to be, often the men don't feel the traditional psychotherapeutic approach is for them, so we want to provide that measurement based passive sensing information combined with some motivational interviewing to actually try to direct towards certain behavior change. So that might be more acceptable. So the idea is to have two separate interfaces. Yeah.
And so next up, we have the project expanding the scope of digital navigators for mental health with generative AI. And so I'd like to invite Matthew Flathers and Carla Gorban to present. Over to you.
Yeah, so we are here to present on a project led by Dr. Torres. I'm a senior data engineer working with him in his division of digital psychiatry out of Beth Israel in Boston.
And I'm Carla Gorban. I'm a digital navigator and lived experience researcher in the Youth Mental Health and Technology team, the Brain and Mind Centre, University of Sydney. And I work with Matt's team.
Yeah, so as we've heard in many of the presentations today, mental health care needs both more data and better data. There's a lot of talk about how a lot of the valuable signals and things happen between sessions. The crisis events and things don't often happen when directly interfacing with providers. They happen at home, they happen between sessions. So there's been a growing need to gather more between session data to kind of accompany clinical care, to kind of better understand what things precipitate crises, how to help support people throughout the journey, not just in their sessions. And so one solution that we do a lot of work on with Dr. Torres is digital phenotyping, which, as we heard in the last presentation, it did a good job of laying out, kind of using that passive sensing data to generate more behavioral features like time spent at home, location entropy, time spent in green space areas, time spent in different kind of neighborhoods. And so all of that is one kind of set of data streams. Combine that with traditional surveys, traditional daily ecological momentary assessments. You can kind of get a larger picture of someone's experience between sessions. And so one of the hard parts to actually utilizing that data is it's high volume. Clinicians don't either have the time or resources to look at it. It's often unintelligible to patients, and it often requires kind of special knowledge to leverage effectively.
Sorry. And so then we have the digital navigator, and a digital navigator is a new service team member, and they are there to support patients, young people, clinician services using digital tools and interpreting the data, if it's digitally enabled measurement-based care, if it's passive data collection through the phenotyping. And so it's really about supporting the technical, issues that might arise, but then using their lived experience to drive engagement with the users or the patients, young people who are using the technology in care, and making sure that they can communicate those findings back to clinicians, back to the patient, and as well as helping that implementation flow within the service and using that technology. And so the background, so we believe that lived experience is essential to this digital navigation role. It doesn't have to be explicitly stated, but it does suit people who have lived experience. And for some reasons that we've put, they know how to, they've been in that situation, so navigating the healthcare systems that they serve, they're aware of what that journey looks like for a person, and so they're able to use their experience to shape how they might personalize that data when they're talking to each individual person who they're helping. They also understand the community needs, so it's a really flexible, adaptable role. It suits all sort of different settings. If it's, in Sydney, Australia, where we're working with private and public practices, if it's in Boston, if it's in Bogota, the UK, it's something that it can be really applicable and accessible to lots of people. And it helps them to, as well, personalize the journey with selecting different digital health tools, different applications, and being that sort of side-by-side person for the patients.
But there's currently a number of limitations around adding these roles, despite the value for adding kind of these navigators to help bring digital technology platforms to people. There's limited reimbursement mechanisms. each individual navigator can only support so many users and clinicians. There's a lot of time-intensive manual workflows, particularly in contexts where they have to do data analysis. And so we've been looking into the potential for large language models to kind of augment the existing digital navigators and help kind of scale them in terms of the amount of workload that they can support. And so we arrived at an agentic system. I liked the AI in the loop terminology because that's very much the kind of system we're trying to build, where we investigate how well large language models can serve a variety of different needs that the digital navigators have in terms of searching through tech support documentation, searching through education modules, querying existing databases of resources that a team might have, doing kind of standardized data analysis practices. And so the idea is a tool in which the digital navigators interface in what looks like a chatbot interface. The LLM parses what the request from the digital navigator is, a set of standardized tools that either are LLM-based or often more traditional NLP or other forms of kind of development, run a number of different tool calls, and the resulting outputs are then parsed again by the language model to deliver a finalized output and recommendation to the DN. And so this is some of our team members. You'll see Carla and I are in charge of engineering and user research. Dr. Toros is leading up the project. We have a number of other supporters and advisory folks who are some listed here. Not everybody's listed here. And then, so from the accelerator phase, we did a number of foundational experiments just to test what happens if you just throw everything at a large language model. So rather than doing specialized tool development, just dump raw passive data, dump raw behavioral feature data, dump standard databases, dump educational materials directly into the LLM context and see what it does. And you can see here some of our results. It does not do particularly well. LLMs are not a one-size-fits-all technology. There are many tasks they are not good at. And so we've tried to extract it down to they are good at identifying what needs to happen. They're not necessarily good at the data analysis themselves. They need support in actually pouring through high volumes of data without causing hallucinations. And so that is kind of from our technical foundation what we have found so far.
And with the user research results, we conducted interviews with our digital navigators involved in the team, and especially those with lived experience as well. And they were able to, we identified the, I guess, barriers or things that were harder to, or just detracted really, I guess, from the valuable things, which was relationship building, meeting with users to discuss their data and come up with plans on how to implement what the data was telling them. Meeting with clinicians to share those updates were really key, valuable, important things to the optimization of the digital navigator role. And so tasks that were more repetitive, like engagement metrics, reporting, identifying different resources that might be useful or helpful for an individual, and then the troubleshooting as well. That can all take quite a lot of time and detract from the amount of people that you can help and that you can see as a digital navigator.
Yeah, so from those initial accelerator results, we've landed on a very modular design where each tool is developed in such a way that it can be integrated into this agentic system. But say you just have educational materials you want to parse, you would be able to say, just pull from this tool and let me parse and deliver my education materials. Or I just want to do data analysis on passive dating or passive data. Let me pull just this resource. And so the goal is to make a system that can be adapted to a number of different digital navigation use cases, not just the ones that we currently work with. So we're closing in on finalizing kind of development for the tool, the various tools, and kind of the orchestration. And our kind of next hope is to run a larger scale validation study where we compare a number of different metrics for traditional DNs supporting a clinic versus DNs who now have this AI agentic tool to accompany them, to see how long do they have to spend per patient, how much do they enjoy the usability of the tool, how useful it is to the end users and the patients in the clinic. Does it impact at all the delivery of what they are seeing? And so this is kind of what we will hope to do next with some of the grant funding. And that is it.
Thank you for the presentation. We've seen that the role of DCNs has been pretty successful in engagement and utilisation of digital health tools, and I think that's been a really positive area where they've had some impact. And I think a lot of that is down to that there's a human holding someone accountable for, utilisation and engagement. I guess my question is, do you ever see that role being replaced or augmented by AI, or are you sort of preserving that interface?
That is a very good question. And part of the reason I mentioned the AI in the loop framework is because in all of our user research testing, we found both the digital navigators, but also the patients who interact with them found they want to interact with a human. They want to still have that human connection in terms of driving their engagement. There's something lost if they're just interacting with a chat interface. And then on the other side, from our pilot experiments, we found hallucinations were still not common, but often enough as to be a problem if you were exposing it directly to end users. There's enough things where you want that human digital navigator who has the ability to sanity check, to verify, to make sure that everything is sensible before actually interacting with the patient or user with it. We think it's incredibly important that you don't get rid of the human digital navigator role and just try and plug in an AI solution for that use case.
So with the VR work we're doing, we do stuff in Spanish and English, which Spanish isn't as complicated as some other languages. But I saw you had trials in Bogota. I mean, presumably that's in Spanish language.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how the normal LLMs do English versus other languages in the data you showed there.
Yeah. So the pilot data was from kind of internal simulated data. We've not yet run it with any kind of clinics yet. If we kind of move forward and can run this larger clinical study, part of the funding would go to the multiple language testing. So testing it in Spanish, testing it in a couple other languages of associated sites to see not only does it work in English, but will it also work in kind of the languages of the communities we're testing in. So there's significant engineering and translation workload that would go into actually testing it in non-English sites.
We have our last team presentation now, and thank you everyone for keeping the energy levels. So we'll hear from James King and Vibhore Prasad. They'll tell us about GenAI-enabled treatment optimization service for real-world clinical guideline used by primary care clinicians and their patients. So over to you.
Hello, I'm Vibhore Prasad. I'm a clinical associate professor in primary care and adult mood disorders at the University of Nottingham, funded by the National Institute of Health and Care Research Senior Clinical and Practitioner Research Award and the NIHR TRC Mental Health Mission. I'm also a practicing senior NHS GP in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire.
Hello, I'm James King. I'm a digital product designer from a company called Fora Health, and we help patients and clinicians work together better to optimize treatment and make shared decisions. We're here to talk about our project, which is being led by Dartmouth Institute in New Hampshire in America. Our project is to leverage GenAI to support better mental health management in primary care settings based on clinical guidelines.
So we'll start by describing the problem that we're here to help solve. So both here and in other countries around the world, the healthcare system is traditionally organized into 2 or more levels. On the one hand, you have primary care, which is where I'm situated, and on the other hand, you have secondary care. When we're medical students, we think of it as GPs versus hospitals in the UK, but secondary care is obviously not just physical health hospitals. It could be mental health hospitals or community mental health specialist services. So within the primary care level, we have specialist generalists like myself, which always sounds a bit confusing, but I'm trained to be a general practitioner or family health physician, and I'm supported by a multidisciplinary team of people who work as clinicians in primary care. We have a broad knowledge across a wide range of domains, and we can treat routine conditions, but only up to a certain threshold, because beyond that, it's not within my area of expertise, and I can't train to do everything for every speciality. So at that point, I might make a referral. That may mean different things in different health settings. That could be phone calls, but it's usually some form of written communication where I describe my story, the patient's story, and my findings from my examination or my clinical observations. I make that referral to secondary care. That referral is then received in secondary care, and in this example, by the mental health specialists, psychiatrists, often working in local mental health teams. They have a deeper domain knowledge, and they are there to respond to my referrals and deal with the more complex cases, which would mean seeing those patients and assessing them. At least that's how it should be working. So in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, where I work as a general practitioner, or many other places around the UK and the world, mental health issues make up a large percentage of our caseload. There is a lot of demand, and my time is limited. Specialist services in my area are also overburdened, as they are throughout the world, which we've heard all day today, resulting in long waiting times and very high acceptance thresholds. Unless the GP can justify that the patient is at risk, their referrals will be declined, and patients will need to be managed in primary care. And it is not only those people who don't meet that threshold, sometimes it feels a bit random as to which referrals are not accepted, perhaps because of the way the letter has been worded or the mood of the committee on the day. So those people end up back with me. In my area, on average, 60% of mental illness referrals are declined, and GPs hit a ceiling on what is safe to manage, and there's little guidance on the next steps. Patients are therefore left stuck between primary and secondary care, and there's a blurred boundary of responsibilities. Patients fail to access effective care early, resulting in deterioration, growing frustration, loss of confidence in the system, and recurrent attendances at my clinic.
So now I'd just like to present our project. To help address this problem, we will build an LLM-powered assistant to support clinicians in primary care. Clinicians will be able to make queries about best practices in mental health care. And the assistant will provide answers and guidance that help fill the gaps in clinical knowledge. This will help generalists or specialist generalists extend their expertise and apply best practice guidelines with confidence. And there are 3 important ingredients to our system. Firstly, the assistant will have access to a collection of high-quality guidelines, which it will use to help answer the clinician's queries. There'll be national guidelines, such as the NICE clinical knowledge summaries, specialist guidelines, such as the Maudsley prescribing guidelines, as well as local guidelines. Secondly, the information in these guidelines will be indexed using a knowledge graph data structure. This allows the assistant to navigate the guidelines more effectively and reliably retrieve the right information. Thirdly, the role of the LLM system won't just be to answer the clinician's queries. It will also help the clinician clarify their questions. We call this type of system question definition and question answering, or QDQA for short. Here are some user interface designs to give you an idea of how this will come together. Here the clinician has a patient with depression who's not tolerating their SSRI, and they've just entered in an initial query into the assistant's chat screen. Before offering any guidance, the assistant then restates the clinician's query as a question and asks for some clarifications. This is the question definition system at work. When the question has been defined, then the assistant can generate an answer by summarizing the knowledge from the appropriate resources and delivering it to the clinician. So I'd just like to talk about safety next. As we know, large language models are fallible, so there will always be a non-zero chance that a response from the assistant will contain factual errors. And we need a way to reliably evaluate the quality of these LLM responses. In May of this year, OpenAI released HealthBench, which is an open source data set for evaluating the reliability of large language model responses to health-based queries. The dataset contains thousands of example prompts that simulate health-related queries from patients and clinicians, and each prompt is paired with a rubric that's been authored by over 200 clinicians from around the world. You can use this dataset to evaluate the reliability of any large language model system by passing in each prompt into the LLM, generating a candidate response, and then scoring that response based on the dedicated rubric. After evaluating the whole dataset, then the overall performance of a particular LLM system can be scored. As part of our project, we'll help to develop another open source evaluation dataset modeled on HealthBench, but with some focus on guidelines for psychiatric care and medicine. We will improve on the format of HealthBench while ensuring backwards compatibility so that it can be used by any candidate LLM system, not just the one that we're developing. So, the main outputs of our project will be a functional platform suitable for testing the validity of the approach with clinicians and patients, an open source evaluation dataset for benchmarking the performance of LLM-powered clinical decision support systems in psychiatry, and research findings from evaluating the system with clinicians and patient users. During the MEXA accelerator so far, we've conducted feasibility work so that we are confident there are no technical barriers to building the system that we're imagining. We've built partnerships with clinical organizations, and we've conducted 2 rounds of co-design work with patients and clinicians in the UK and Nigeria. Here are the co-applicants of our team. Our PI is Professor Glyn Elwyn. He's a former GP from Wales who is now based at the Dartmouth Institute in New Hampshire, and he's a leader in a practice called shared decision making. Before we finish, we'd just like to say a word about scaling. So as well as initial research in Nottinghamshire, we're also planning to conduct research in other UK locations. In the US, we're in discussion with Access Community Health Network in the Chicago area. They have very similar problems to the ones in Nottinghamshire and could be another context in which to conduct research. We're also in contact with the network of primary care clinicians in Lagos, Nigeria. And everyone should know the statistic by now because this is the 3rd time it's been said, but there is 700,000 patients or people to 1 psychiatrist in Lagos, Nigeria. So effectively no secondary care that most people can access. And so we see a strong opportunity for our proposed system to scale to other geographies and contexts in the future. So thanks very much for listening. Happy to take any questions.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to ask if there's any behavior change element that you've thought about for the primary care clinicians before they start using the assistant, or whether there's any training that primary care clinicians need to do before they start using the assistant. Like, I imagine there's some process before they jump in, or maybe there's not?
I'm sure there probably would be some introduction. I don't think we thought about that yet. Obviously, primary care clinicians need to be aware of the sorts of systems they're using and what's sensible for them to be asking it. I think that'll probably be part of the project at some point, but yeah, we haven't got to that point yet.
Although I would probably add that we've started talking to real primary care physicians, so we are getting some feedback already during the accelerator phase.
And thank you for the presentation. And my question is regarding the benchmarking part. You talk about the OpenAI's Health Bench. And maybe the first question is like, how many clinicians you plan to involve to build your benchmarking strategy? Because OpenAI, they incorporated a few hundreds of clinicians in their evaluation pipeline.
So Health Bench is over 5,000 example queries, and they had a team of about 230 clinicians around the world. We're imagining about a fifth of that, so about 1,000 example queries, but just focused on this particular area. And therefore, the number of clinicians required to sort of create the rubrics will be a lot fewer than that, about a fifth.
Yeah, so I would imagine like there could be a lot of efforts for doing that. And my following up question is that, then compare with the Health Bench, or maybe including Google's Amir. So what are the advantages or difference of your benchmarking?
So the significant change we'd like to make is that the system that we're designing has got this question definition step, and Health Bench doesn't have that. It just has an initial query and then a response from the LLM. And that response could be a request for clarification, or it could be an answer to the question. But what we want to do is to have a separate rubric for the question definition part as well, but also have one for the answers, so that another candidate LLM that doesn't use the same design as ours can still use the same data set, but ours just has this extra bit that we can then use to look at more details in the way our system works. I think I answered your question. I might have missed the first part of your question there, which I can't remember now, so sorry, I have to ask afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting project. And talking also about the benchmark from another perspective, it's great because you say you are going to open source the benchmark, but I'm asking how can you ensure that the benchmark becomes relevant after open sourcing? Because we know like all LLMs, including open weights, they use any data available to be trained.
Yeah.
Legally or legally, even if you put in some conditions, they've been trained on that probably, no? So, I mean, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so Health Bench has it's called a canary. It's just like a special string that's unique to that, which if it shows up in training data sets should alert whoever's training a large language model that they shouldn't be using that. I think if a system gets too good at answering the information in the training set, then it's obviously had it in the training set, which would be a shame. But there's no answer to that. It's just one of those things which probably will degrade over time.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, the system is designed mainly for clinicians who would be treating either, so...
Right, but as a clinician, do you expect that this will be most useful for decreasing the visit rate of depressed patients or anxious patients?
That's not something we can currently answer with the data because we haven't done the work sufficiently to say.
But your expectation?
I'm a researcher, so
okay.
I don't think I can speculate.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer that question.
Yeah, sorry.
I could wildly speculate, but...
Great work. I hate to expand it, but have you included the electronic health records? Because that might contain information probably more germane to the other specialties, but perhaps for the psychiatric specialties, well, like the medications, what other symptoms were. Often it's very overlooked, but when you're building a knowledge database to reason over, I mean, that would be amazing if you included that to reason over as well.
Yeah, our emphasis so far has been on efficient and accurate retrieval of best practice clinical knowledge. But there was a the box on our slide which had like EHR written on it and an arrow going in. And that's something we're looking at as well, because just being able to summarize what's in a patient's EHR before the patient visits could be incredibly helpful in finding them the right treatment sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
Yeah, so huge thank you to all the teams that presented. It has been really inspiring to hear how much your projects have advanced and projects coming from all over the world in different contexts. So it has been fascinating. Thank you. And I will now hand over to Matt Brown, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Joanna. Great. So firstly, we are actually ahead of time, incredibly. Like the number of talks, I think that's a testament both to the organizing team, but also thank you to you all for sort of keeping to script. It's been fantastic. So it's really my pleasure to introduce Professor Jackie Hunter to go out with a bang today. So actually, Jackie won't remember this, but in 2017, I actually ran at Wellcome when I first arrived, a workshop on AI for mental health. And Jackie was one of the first people on our invitee list. And I also was part of a discussion that she moderated at the time. And I was relatively new to Wellcome at that point and kind of could feel my brain expanding in real time as she provided her insights and expertise. So in terms of Jackie's background, so Jackie led Benevolent Bio, establishing it as the R&D arm of Benevolent AI, where she helped pioneer the use of AI to accelerate drug discovery. She brings deep scientific expertise from her time as Senior VP at GSK and has chaired major biotech and digital health initiatives, including Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst, Singapore's Digital Health Accelerator Board. She has many different advisory roles across UK, Europe, Asia, including A-STAR, BP's Innovation Council, and the Royal Society. And she's also has a consultancy, OI Pharma Partners, that provide expert insight on AI in science and health, as well as health economics analysis and digital health tools. And she's going to talk to us today. I think that the presentation title is Start with the End in Mind.
Yep.
Is that correct? So please join me in welcoming Jackie.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I've been blown away by all the presentations today and the aspirations that people have. And I was asked to kind of talk about basically some of the learnings that I've had through some of the digital health companies and initiatives I've been involved with, but also some of the potential kind of more generally for AI in mental health. I say start with the end in mind, and the reason for that is, although I've heard a lot today about people's plans for scalability, etc., ultimately it seemed to me that everybody here, and especially the funders, want to really make sure that this initiative generates output that is translated, whether it's for-profit, non-for-profit, but something that really makes a difference to people. And to do that, you have to scale. And so these were some of the points which I'll touch on later about really, I believe, right at the beginning, even though this is very basic research, and I know many of you have thought about these things anyway, but that you really have to address the medical problem. What is the medical problem? What's the root cause? I mean, we've seen, there's a poster about compliance. We know that people can be shown that they haven't complied with their medicine, or there's lots of indications and they're still not complying. So what is the root cause of people not complying? So what's the root cause of your problem? Is it a clear unmet need? And if you are going to want to have it adopted, who's actually going to pay for that? Who's your customer? Is it the patient? Is it the healthcare system? Service, the clinician? So what's the required level of performance? There are 20,000 wellness and mental health apps in the US alone. What is the performance? What is that you have to do? And what is really important And we've heard about being careful about hallucinations, about what's the failure rate. How it fits into existing workflows is really, really important as well. Is your software or is your architecture readily accessible into different healthcare systems if that's where you want to deploy it? And what are the barriers to adoption apart from just the technical, but also in terms of complexity, freedom to operate? Or perhaps we'll come on to talk about that, about the user interface. There's we've heard in many of the talks about the importance of the user experience. Well, is the user going to continue to use your intervention if it's required from over long term? Scalability we've talked about. And at the core, privacy and security. It's about trust. People really, really need to be assured that their data will be safe, that they have control over their data, and that their data will not be used in a bad way. And risk mitigation, whether it's technical risk, regulatory risk. There's a huge issue around regulation in this particular space. We've heard from people about some of the issues. I've been working in neuroscience for quite a long time. And basically, there haven't been any new treatments. Zamalenine for psychosis, it's been given with something that blocks its peripheral side effects. Psilocybin and its various metabolites, ketamine, S-ketamine. These are not new in the sense that we're understanding the pathways. So there's not really been any major advances, I believe, in terms of the kind of pharmacological therapeutics or even pathway understanding. And how we measure is very crude, and we know that access to mental health services is very challenging. But, I've been incredibly excited over the last 10 years at how AI and now how large language models, generative AI, are really opening up this space. And I think in mental health, there's huge opportunities. I'll talk a bit more about this later, but genetic studies are really challenging our traditional classifications of psychiatric disease and also other diseases, neurological diseases as well. And the ability to combine different modalities like imaging, like other biomarkers, as well as behavioral data. So there's some really exciting stuff coming out about neuroimaging and behavioral data. This analysis can only be done with the power of AI. And of course, we've been hearing about how you can do much more with kind of remote monitoring as well. But I do think that one of the things that we must always come back to is that this is as much a social science as it is a technological and medical science. So really having patients at the heart of this, we've heard that, but I think this is really, really important. So we can see that in terms of predictions, in terms of being able to predict who's going to relapse, whether there will be an episode, preemptive intervention, personalised approaches to diagnosis and treatment. We've heard a lot about that today. I think the availability, I'll touch on this when I talk about benevolent, of being able to access the huge corpus of data that we could never access before. We can ask questions that we could never ask before. The ability to enhance patient-clinician communication. I'm sort of biomedically savvy, but sometimes I'll sit and I'm listening to diagnosis from my doctor and I'm just not taking it in. Telemedicine offers huge opportunities to reach people who are not able to access, especially mental health services. But also, I don't know, I'm certain that this is the case in the US, and I know it's the case in the UK, the administrative burden that's come on top of clinicians at the moment is just overwhelming. But also, the administrative burden for patients, filling out claim forms, filling out, kind of planning appointments, navigating the healthcare landscape. These are things that AI can really help with. in terms of mental health. We've heard about some of the approaches today, but in terms having that having that 24/7 emotional support, and now we have the capability to actually have chatbots who are empathetic, who can emote, who can, when appropriately trained, really help people to express their feelings. And there is a lot of evidence that people, in some ways, feel a lot more able to talk to a chatbot than to necessarily an individual. But also, it depends on the context. Robotics, for example, can be incredibly important in terms of physical support. And I sort of see the chatbots as the kind of mental equivalent of the robotics. In terms of analysing speech and writing and behaviour patterns, again, we've heard from people today about that. And that's not just in the case of mental health, but also for neurological diseases like Parkinson's. Generating therapeutic content, therapeutic personalised. I mean, this is really going to transform our ability to personalise medicine. Sorry. I've been struck by some lurgy, and I had to go to the doctor this morning. And as you know, in the UK, actually having a doctor's appointment is a bit like getting the lottery. So I didn't really want to miss it. But I've got my antibiotics, and I'm not infectious, so I'm okay. And then, again, examples of monitoring, medication reminders. But I think this whole business about increased access and democratisation of healthcare is going to be fundamentally important going forward. I think the most immediate thing that is perhaps easiest to do is to actually really help clinicians in terms of their accessing the patient data. How many times have you heard patients going and they see a different doctor each time, they have to rehearse what they've said last time, and there's could be the potential for inconsistency there. I've mentioned the link to imaging so that we can inform clinical care with the integration. So this whole aspect of multimodal integration. But I'd like you to think about your interventions not just as a isolated part of the puzzle. We have to create systems where this integration is across the whole pathway. I think one of the areas that I'm most excited about in terms of basic research is the ability to try and identify new pathways. We know in neurological diseases, for example, that if we look at a mechanism as opposed to a symptom, we can identify common mechanisms against different diseases. So if we take frontal temporal lobe dementia and other completely different neurological diseases, we can see the same pathways involved. And I think there's a real opportunity to redefine psychiatric diseases, not in terms of their symptom, but actually in terms of their mechanism. And we can already know from genetic studies that there are overlaps in terms of the genetic endotypes across different psychiatric diseases. So I think that's going to be really, really exciting. We heard again about clinician-patient communication. I think the ability to be able to help patients understand medical terminology, to actually take away from their consultation a true or a more easily digestible output for them is really important. Helping them understand medical terminology. Oh, sorry about this. And the removal of language barriers, but not just language barriers, but also looking at the cultural context as well. Right. So Benevolent AI was one of the first companies that was founded to look at the potential of AI in drug discovery and development. And when it was founded, it was actually ahead of its time. And it had some powerful technology in terms of building knowledge graphs to link diseases, mechanisms, new targets, that actually the pharmaceutical industry wasn't really ready for. But now, there are literally thousands of companies in this space. But what I... oh gosh, I'm sorry about this. I'm going... What I learned from there is visual representations are powerful in explaining the technology. I'm sure you're aware of this. But I think this is important because going forward, we really have to engage the public as well as the patients in understanding the potential of technology. And if you have visual representations, I mean, some people today had videos, etc. It's really important to help people understand that. Clearly, data quality is absolutely king, but frequently I find that in a lot of data sets, negative data is not always incorporated into representation. It's harder to incorporate into representations in the knowledge graph. I said earlier, you can ask questions of the data that you could never ask before, but actually, even more importantly now, knowing what question to ask and how to ask it is really, really important. One of the things very early on, and I don't know how appropriate this is for you now, but actually when we started bringing the biologists and the chemists and the data scientists together, they actually had a very different understanding of what things meant. So benchmarking to a data scientist means something completely different to benchmarking in a biologist or a chemist. And really bringing together the teams, taking the best elements of both what we would call project management in drug discovery and agile in the case of data science, so that we created a culture that was really valuable but different and specific to our particular use case, as it were, in this case, drug discovery, was really important. And the other thing, as you go forward and you want to scale your intervention, you will be working with other partners, some of you already are, but it's really important to have truly partnership. We had, for example, with AstraZeneca, a shared project team, so that we had project team members who were equally important from both Benevolent and AstraZeneca. And I think even whether you're talking about having a partnership with a pharma company, with a digital company, with a healthcare provider or a distributor or whatever, really thinking about how you build that partnership is very important. And that links to being clear about your business model. If from the outset you intend to be a non-for-profit, then that might determine how you build your architecture. If on the other hand you want to build, you want to be for-profit, thinking about how you measure your outcomes and demonstrate value becomes even more important. So brainomics, I think, is very relevant here. It was funded, so brainomics has a stroke solution. It started off providing a stroke solution. A radiologist will look at the brain of a person who's had a stroke and can say, probably if they have had an ischemic stroke, where there's an occlusion blockage, or a hemorrhagic stroke, where there's a bleed on the brain, but actually determine whether that patient should have a thrombectomy, where they scrape the artery, or a clot-busting drug, thrombolysis, is usually in the realms of the neurologist, well, will be in the realms of the neurologist. And that's important because you've probably heard the thing, time is brain in a stroke, and you need to get thrombolysis very quickly, or thrombectomy quickly. And Alistair Buchan is a very prominent stroke consultant, and he developed the software solution with other clinicians. It took a long time. From this company was actually founded in 2013 as well. But the solution they came up with was tested with users, was tested with the radiologists as well as the clinicians, and fitted into the workflow within the hospital environment, whether it was a server-based solution or a cloud-based solution. So the scalability was really important. It was launched in Europe, became market leader in Europe, and is now commercialized in the US. And that scalability was important because, development path was important because there are rival products on the market, but they weren't developed so closely with the clinician. The mobile applications and the visualizations were not as well honed to what the clinician needed, and the implementation. So basically, it was not there to make the radiologists more efficient, it was there to make the clinicians more effective. And it increased treatment rates by 80%. One of they're now developing some new software in idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis to track the development of patients who've got progressive IPF. So the learnings, it did take time, and it frustrated the hell out of the venture capital people who were investing in it. But that time is now paying dividends because it's taking market share from Viz and Rapid, who are the competing technologies. They also did clinical trials very early on, and to show the value both in the US and in Europe. And they were able to use that to show that it cut the time taken for diagnosis by several hours, and it fitted into the hospital workflows. Clearly, the important thing here was there was an actionable diagnosis. They could either have a thrombectomy or thrombolysis. Another thing that really made a difference to them was due to COVID. One of the good things that came out of COVID was that they were able to get an NHSR grant, NHSX award to deploy the solution to 30 hospitals in the UK. And through that, they were able to generate cost-effectiveness data that demonstrated that the solution really did provide cost-effectiveness and then enabled, when the grant ran out, hospitals to justify renewing the license. I've heard one person, I wasn't here in the morning because I had my doctor's appointment, talk about reimbursement. At the moment, whether it's across certainly Europe, but much less so in the US, there is not really a bridge between the evidence of impact and cost effectiveness and reimbursement as clearly as it could be. And this is something that certainly been talking to people in Europe about in terms of their new legislation they're looking at. And reimbursement matters certainly if you want to commercialize a product, but the whole cost effectiveness matters if you want to deploy it across a healthcare system. One of the other things that may or may not be relevant, but I think it is relevant because this was with pharma partnerships, but I think this could be with tech companies or whoever, is sometimes it's better to have a collaboration where you don't necessarily get a lot of money up front, but your collaborator gives you in kind. There could be clinical data, there could be clinical validation. And actually thinking early on about this cost effectiveness and clinical validation is really important when you're doing your validation studies, because you could actually have some measures in there that would be very simple to implement, like it might be, I've heard there have been some, like number of treatment days or time in hospital or saving clinicians time. But getting that data up front when you're doing your initial validation studies will save you time and money later. The Digital Health Accelerator was set up in Singapore to really address a gap in the sense that there were lots of needs that the hospital system and care providers had there, and there were a lot of innovative companies, but actually finding the money to get those solutions into the hospitals and show they worked to justify then continuing to license those solutions there was a bit of a mismatch. And this is where the government stepped in. Maybe the Wellcome Trust might step in. This is where the government stepped in and provided some funding to help deploy the innovative solutions across the healthcare system. And why was that important? Well, it allowed them to have a reference site so that they could then reach out to other sites, other countries. Now, a lot of the aim is around Singaporean companies or companies that are based in Asia Pacific. And coming back to the analogy in terms of Nigeria, certainly in Indonesia and the Philippines, there's a real dearth of clinicians and healthcare practitioners, whether it's radiologists, psychiatrists, or whatever. Of course, if you want to expand into the US, you do need US data, but having good reference data is important for Asia-specific. And there are some very Asian-specific examples. So, for example, in terms of breast cancer, the denseness of the breasts in Asian-Pacific population is different to that in, say, Western populations. So you can build products that are specific to that particular population. One of the things that I haven't heard much today, and maybe that's just because obviously the focus is very much about these products, is how it fits into the existing landscape. Are there other products out there like it? And if so, why is what you're trying to do better? Or are there opportunities to collaborate where there's, or where things could fit in together into a pathway? And so one of the things that when we're looking at the DHA is really looking at what is the competitor landscape, because clearly for the Singaporean ecosystem, actually, you know, it's a make versus buy type assessment. And but I have to say, actually adding some financial help for the via the accelerator has enabled companies to scale quite nicely. And there are other schemes I know in the US as well. So that's some of the learnings that I've had. But one of the things that I think the real potential is to be transformational. We can use AI to improve processes that already exist. And we can use them to maybe slightly redefine some processes that exist. But I think the real potential is where we actually completely disrupt the system and do something completely different. But the issue with that, of course, is that it's much easier to disrupt something, to do that where there's nothing in place. And that's where I think the potential of AI to really transform healthcare systems in countries where there's very little already in existence is really, really exciting, because you're not having to break something down and rebuild it. You can actually go in and really demonstrate value. So that's where I think the real potential could be. So what are the barriers? We've heard some of the barriers. Obviously, data availability and quality. In the UK, we talk about one NHS, but there's a lot of variability there. And actually accessing data can be quite hard. The power of AI is to allow us to access data across multiple sources. But unless we get some sort of standardization, I mean, the analogy would be like in the United States when the Qualcomm standard was mandated for mobile phones. It allowed interoperability across different systems, and it really drove the development of our applications. And bias, I haven't heard a lot about bias, but there is the potential for bias, both in terms of the data sets we have, but also in terms of the way we train the models. Explainability, we talked about trust. Unless we understand and understand people's concerns and engage with them, we'll end up with something like the GM disaster we had in the UK. We have to take the time to explain what we are doing and how we are doing it. I mean, Demis Havassis nobody's from Google here, I don't think, but he says that ultimately he wants to build things that will then tell you this is how we did it. There are social concerns, obviously about job losses, the erosion of clinical expertise, but also, if we build these models, especially around mental health, that can predict mental health, or who's going to access those models? How are they going to be used? The potential for bad things to happen. The whole regulatory landscape is still grappling with the whole issue here. Version control, there are initiatives around rolling assessments that are going on with companies like PathAI, but really how we deal with this going forward is and again, we have to engage with regulators and be very proactive. And we've heard about the ethical concerns as well. I would make a plea for more clinical trials of these AI interventions because, I've heard some clinical trials, but really, we've heard about some of the, today about Therabot, etc. But in a recent paper by Eric Topol, or it's an article, not a paper, just an opinion piece, call for more evidence about how do you select the right control group, for example? What is the right control group? Very little is known about the longitudinal impact of some of these interventions, partly because they're relatively new, but also assessing their effects in a broader context rather than in isolation, so that you can look at them within other treatment options, etc. And there's a whole question about medical liability. This is where, it's maybe less if AI is in the loop, but if AI is kind of the ultimate arbiter, who's medically liable here? And this paper, Matt Almgren, they were looking at, it was a kind of, looked at over 30 trials of mobile apps to see how they all kind of fitted into in terms of evidence base and validation. And a lot of them had a lot of bias, etc. And so they came up with like 5 recommendations if you were developing a mobile app, that basically you should have something that is interoperable, that the platform shouldn't just be on, for example, Android, or shouldn't just be on iPhone, that the user involved experience was critical, which we've heard today, the absolute importance of privacy, and the real importance of getting the lived experience involvement in there as well. So I think, for me, the future is really not just about increasing efficiency, but can we use this new technology, and it's moving at such a pace, that we create a system, a healthcare system, a healthcare environment that is built around people, and actually is one that empowers people, empowers clinicians, empowers patients, empowers all of us, really. But to do that, we're going to have to be much more integrated in the way we work. We're going to have to be perhaps even more ambitious. But we're going to have to bring the population, people, with us as well, because it only takes a few things to go wrong and the whole thing could be very nasty. So with that, I will just summarize to say that I think one of the issues that you'll face as you kind of want to scale your interventions is that a lot of healthcare systems haven't really changed since the 1960s. I mean, they don't have fax machines anymore, but I mean, in the way they are constructed has not fundamentally changed. I've talked about it's easier to build something if there's nothing there. The key is this user-centric innovation. Involve the lived patients in there. We need more evidence, and it's quite evident, I think, from just what I've heard today, is that AI alone, it's really it's the third element in the patient-physician relationship. But I think, I'm incredibly impressed by what I've heard today, but I think thinking about what would be your ultimate goal, what would be the thing that would make it, your legacy, if you will, of what you're building. Think about that end, and then I think the rest will flow a lot more easily. Thank you. I'm sorry about the coughing. Sorry about the coughing.
Well done for getting through it. That was great. Thank you. So I think we've got a bit of time for questions. I am going to take Chair's prerogative and start with one, and then we'll move on. Because I was just really interested, you touched on it slightly, Jackie, but you have a lot of experience in the kind of pharmaceutical sector, and just to get your thoughts or reflections on the regulatory space. So that's clearly quite heavily regulated and quite used to being regulated. Whereas maybe for the digital health space, we're at an earlier stage of that, it feels like here. So are there any particular, are these two things completely separate, or what's your reflections on?
I mean, they're not completely separate in the sense that you need to have regulation, and the regulation will be based on evidence. But you've got software as a medical device regulation. So there are certainly from kind of reimbursement, etc., there are regulatory hurdles that have to be overcome. And I think, I do think they are separate in the sense that in the digital space it's moved so rapidly, whereas in the pharma space, even in my wildest dreams, if we were able to get drug discovery and development more condensed, it's still a much more formulaic and kind of slower process. And I don't, where I do think there's some overlap is where we think about diagnostics and in terms of selection of patients for clinical trials and things like that. I think that is where the regulators need to be perhaps talking more to each other in terms of redefining what is actually necessary. And in terms of, and the other thing where I think it's important is in terms of clinical endpoints. At the moment, there are some really good digital endpoints that are not approved from a regulatory point of view. So if you're going to develop a drug in a particular indication, and especially if we're thinking about mental health and you're coming up with new diagnostic criteria that you have some very good evidence for, are you going to wait until that you have to do N clinical trials before the regulators will accept that as a primary endpoint for a new antipsychotic, for example? I talked about the reclassification of psychiatric disorders. If we've got very good evidence that this particular mechanism is key in a particular set of depression patients and anxiety patients, why would you not think about formulating a clinical trial using that mechanism rather than having to use more? So those are where I can see some differences happening.
Okay, questions? Yes.
When you started your talk, one of the things you said early on was there's no really new approaches to treating depression. For
maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me.
No, I'm curious if you could elaborate that a bit more, that statement, and maybe talk about the future and
if I look at
how you understand the word new, I guess also.
Yeah, okay. So like I started in neuroscience, and I was working when I went to Glaxo sort of in the 1980s. We were working on serotonin. We were working on kind of monoaminergic therapies. Oh, sorry, monoaminergic therapies. Pardon me. And basically, we've got various variants of monoaminergic drugs, whether they're serotonergic or noradrenaline or dopamine, and we've got muscarinics, and we've got psychedelics, and probably NMDA. But I mean, well, ketamine's that way. But there's not been any. It's more like kind of we'll put this in and see what happens. And the other thing that may offend people who like small furry animal models, I don't think we've got any good models of psychiatric disease. And the same with a lot of the neurological. We should focus on models of mechanism and get into man as quickly as possible. And using the new technology where we can look at, for example, functional imaging pathways, where we can look at and combining that with the behavior and with the genetics. My hope is that really we will be able to start understanding much more the wiring of the brain that underpins various endotypes. It's like saying pain, we're treating pain, neuropathic pain, dental pain, whereas we're treating depression, it's many different things. I mean, that's my view. And I think this could open a whole new therapeutic spectrum, but it will take time.
Thank you for the presentation, and thanks for persevering as well. Appreciate getting through it. There was a comment that you made that I find very, very interesting, and it was around the venture capitalists weren't very happy with the time that it took to get to market. And I think commercialisation is a journey in itself, and I think the wrong investor can put the wrong pressure on the company and will ultimately make the wrong decision. So I think the whole area is just fascinating about choosing the right investor that is not aligned. And so I just wondered if you had any top of mind feedback or some experience where maybe those investors have not been aligned with the impact or
boy, how long do you want to take? It's like with investors, it's like having a marriage, right? Mm-hmm. If if it's going to go wrong, right? And the thing is, it's almost like you have to have a prenup. You need investors who have your same values, because things will happen, things will go wrong, and if they're not aligned to your and then going back to the benevolent experience, one of the issues we had there was that there was a bit of schizophrenia. Were we a platform company or were we a drug discovery company? And there are two very different investor communities there. I would say that over the years, so we were talking like 2016 and onwards then, but now you've got digital healthcare investors are very savvy. I'd say the traditional biotech investors are still very behind on the digital curve. So you need to really research your investor and thoroughly, and your list should be a very honed list to the ones that are appropriate for your business model or your product. And the first few meetings, if there's an investor, like one investor might want you to be exit like within 3 years, and you're going to take at least 6 years before you can get the full value of the product. You shouldn't be going with that. You should really persevere and try. And the other thing is not to be too precious about your valuation. This is a closed meeting, right? Ken Mulvaney turned down 200 million because they only valued his company at 800 million, not $1 billion. Bad move. Anyway, so, you've got to be realistic as well.
Just wanted to follow up on what you said about that there aren't any new treatments in depression, and I completely agree with you. First of all, wonderful talk. I loved your presentation. And, in terms of new treatments, yes, I completely agree about medications. But are you also familiar with neuromodulation treatments? And they are based on what we know about the brain regions affected by depression and the networks affected by depression. So transcranial magnetic stimulation, and also our work in a transcranial direct current stimulation. Our clinical trial is 174 people. When we compared active versus sham, is now gone for FDA review, and it's in the final stages of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not up to date with transcranial magnetic. I was probably about 10 years ago, but in terms of therapeutics, maybe I should drugs. But do you really fundamentally, is that helping us understand more about the key brain pathways involved?
Exactly. So one part of that, who it will work for, and that's what our NHR trials are on. So we have an effectiveness trial in depression and also an efficacy trial in bipolar depression. But related to what you said about how we identify depression, the subtypes of depression, or what makes up depression, you talked about genetics. But genetics can tell us about trait, right? It doesn't tell us about state, whereas a depressive state. And that
yeah,
is,
I mean,
yeah.
But if you can have so if, for example, you show that a particular endotype was related to that you had a particular endotype, and you could link that to some mechanistic. It doesn't necessarily mean it's causal, but it could give you some clues as to where you might go therapeutically, or maybe reduce whether or not your intervention is effective in that particular endotype or another.
Exactly. So we have an imaging consortium in which we patients who are medication free and in part of clinical trials, and using machine learning, we were able to find 2 dimensions or subtypes. One dimension that shows a good response to antidepressant medication, SSRIs,
Right.
but not to placebo, and another dimension that doesn't show much response to either placebo or antidepressant
Nice.
medication. And then we've extended this in UK Biobank, and they have different behavioral, the second dimension, they have increased immunological.
I will you'll have to tell me more about
exactly.
this when we're over a drink.
Sorry, I'll just, yeah. Oh, but I wanted to ask about your thoughts about when you said, think about the endpoint in mind.
Yeah.
About commercialization versus not commercialization. What?
So for example, I mean, I know that there are people here who want their solutions to be non-for-profit, but even if it's non-for-profit, you've still got to think about how do you incentivize people to take up that solution. What is the evidence base that makes them want to do that solution versus nothing versus another solution? In terms of commercialization, that's where you really have to think about, well, for one thing, what your example, for example, would it be of value to provide this as a biomarker for clinical trials to pharma companies? And then you'd have to think about how you value that. Are you thinking about it as a downstream royalty sharing thing, or do you want a large upfront payment, or are you, for example, going to use that, get the pharma company to actually pay for the clinical trial? They'll get the data, but you'll also get the data to validate whether your patient population. So, for example, if you could pick patients who are more likely to not respond to placebo, because that's a big issue, then that could be a very exciting patient population for people to trial their new drugs on.
Thanks. I think there's one there and one. Yeah, thank you. So I was intrigued by your diagram with augmentation versus creation, and your line at the very end of your slides where you said that it's easier to penetrate markets where you create, where there's no process.
Yeah.
And right. So I'm curious if you have. So first of all, I'm curious whether that applies to diagnostic or treatments, and I'm also curious, or maybe both. And I'm curious if, in the context of psychopathology, you have, an example of one.
I don't have any example to hand in necessarily in mental disorder, but I mean, going back in time to when mobile phones became much more prevalent, Vodafone had a big effort in South Africa to put all health records, regional nurse health records on mobile phones, because there wasn't a big centralized kind of record keeper. It allowed, so that they were able to put something in very quickly and easily, whereas if they tried to do mobile health records in, say, the UK, it would have been a lot harder, because we've got our we had our paper records at the doctor's surgeries and things like that.
So you mean it's easier to penetrate markets where there's no process yet?
Yes. Yeah. Or where, I mean, again, thinking more on, this is more on radiology and pathology, say in Asia. The analogy was used about psychiatrists and in Nigeria, but there's really hardly any per head of population radiologists in Indonesia and the Philippines, and so if you can put in a solution that allows those radiologists to be much more efficient, and you can process scans without them having... So that is an area where it's much more easy to get traction, essentially, and sometimes that can help you penetrate markets where you've already got, where there's already a solution. But if you can demonstrate your solution is superior in that area, then it gives you a springboard into a more developed market.
But isn't that like the FDA, for example, requires US data?
Sorry?
Isn't that a problem for regulation? Because typically they require data with the population.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the US require, you have to have US data. But then it's easier if you were going to commercialize or whatever to get people to carry out those studies in the US. The other thing that's also quite interesting from the US perspective is that some of the major hospitals, like the Mayo, will take equity in companies and actually give their data, etc. So that can be a route into getting A, data, and B, funding as well.
Thanks. So we're running a little close to time, and I don't want to be the only session that runs over time. But I think we'll have 2 more questions. So we've got one at the front, and I think one at the back. Yeah, Tanzeem with the mic. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Aside from technological barriers, do you see any other barriers to a more mechanism-based approach to biomedical science? So RCTs are sort of the gold standard for evidence, and they allow you to not really care what the mechanism is, just that it works or doesn't work.
Well, they do care, because you have to have small furry animal-based evidence normally. But I think if you have a measure of the mechanism, a biomarker of that mechanism in the human participants of the trial, so I show that this mechanism, my drug affects this mechanism in rodents and in dogs or whatever, and actually in phase 1 studies I show that this drug affects this mechanism in people, and I have good evidence from neuroimaging, from electrophysiology or whatever, that this mechanism could be important in depression. And we can do a phase 2 study where we measure the biomarker, but this is also where it's really important to get, I believe, better diagnostic criteria as well, because at the moment a lot of the clinical endpoints, as I saw, is a bit like sledgehammer in a nut type things, a bit like ADAS, COG, and CIBIC in Alzheimer's disease. So I think if you can build that case, but I think it does hinge on having a clinical biomarker that you are affecting that mechanism, whether it's, you could have a PET study looking at displacement of a ligand, or whether it's actually a physiological output or something like that.
I think one of the problems for digital products is that you can't use them on animals before you use them on humans. But so that mechanism, you have to have an argument for why it would work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's true in terms of a digital biomarker. But if you were able to show that your digital biomarker through kind of multimodal analysis was reflective of the physiological or whatever mechanistic output in the animal and that in the human, I think, so you might be able to build the argument. But yes, I mean, I think that is a bit of a, can't ask mice to do digital tests.
Thanks. And yeah,
okay. I had a question that when you mentioned in terms of kind of clinical trials and the results that you're getting, and the kind of sometimes misalignment or not having enough data in terms of payment model or clinical pathways, which I think is very interesting. So from your experience, are there ways that it has been done effectively? Because kind of in the US, there's different organizations, right? Like NIH funds clinical trials and the research, and there is no expectation to generate the metrics that relate to translation or implementation. There's very little. And Center for Medicare Medicaid does the payment codes. And as a result, companies that are doing kind of business model and financial analysis often aren't research-based. So there is a big gap in terms of the research that's been done. And the other aspect is also infrastructure and integration. And mental health, it's a big one, because if you go to big hospital system, the IT resources that are dedicated to mental health infrastructure is bottom of the queue almost, because they don't generate revenue. So what have you seen that has been effective?
Well, I mean, talking to companies in the UK that are going to the US, there is more certainty about what you need for reimbursement. So if you get to get a reimbursement code, there's more certainty about it in some existing conditions. One statistic that I read that was fascinating, and I think if one could align such organisations to thinking about mental health in this way, United Healthcare, I think they're one of the biggest in the US. They have 196 hospitals and a whole load of primary care centres. So they have 44,000 annual patient encounters annually, and they are building. So this might be an interesting place for you guys to go. They have one of the most sophisticated that I've seen AI strategies that they've built over the last few years. They have pilot hubs where they take solutions and they will pilot them, but they will have the infrastructure to then scale those digital solutions across the organization. And one of the early things they did, that I've seen the data from 5 years, started 5 years ago, was they used their data to develop an algorithm to predict sepsis. And they were able to show over 3 years that they could reduce the time for predicting sepsis by 8 to 16 hours, which, when you know sepsis, it's really important to get antibiotics as quickly as possible, is huge. So it's I think this is where when I was talking about systems, the issue is we've all got very fragmented healthcare systems. Although we've got secondary care and primary care, we've got public and private and very fragmented. And that's where I think governments, etc., can mandate some standardization about which will allow some integration across these things. But yeah, I mean, it is fragmented, but you can't. But it also depends as well, I think, on your the clinical trials you're doing. You know, are there endpoints, or are there data that, or samples, or whatever, that you can collect that are not necessarily? I mean, obviously, imaging is quite an expensive add-on, but are there other things like wearables or other more low-cost interventions that could then help you build the case in terms of generating a reimbursable, or certainly making the cost-effectiveness argument?
Fantastic. Great. I think that we'll call time on it there, but join me in thanking Jackie once again. And so I believe it just is left for me to close out. First of all, thank you all for making this such an energizing and exciting day. It's been fantastic to listen to all the discussions and the talks. Before we release you for drinks, there is a photo. And we will take the photo somewhere. Where shall we take the photo? Here. So you're all going to join up here. We'll have a big group photo. And then there's posters, drinks, nibbles, and then dinner later on at 7 p.m. So thank you all.